one of How to Train Your Dragon's best moments happened by accident. How to Train Your Dragon turns 15 years old this week, so here are some things I bet you never knew about it. The story behind How to Train Your Dragon begins in the early 1970s on Little Colonsay Island off the Isle of Mull in Scotland. Future author Cressida Cowell spent her childhood summers there, and as she wrote on her website, the island had no roads, houses, or electricity, and I used to imagine that there were dragons living in the caves in the cliffs. Her family had a small stone house on the island that was lit by candlelight. She recalled, there was no telephone or television, so I spent a lot of time drawing and writing stories. In the evening, my father used to tell us tales of the Vikings who invaded this island archipelago 1,200 years before. Cowell went on to get a BA in English Literature from Oxford University, a BA in Graphic Design from St. Martin's, and an MA in Narrative Illustration from Brighton. She became an author in the late 90s, writing and illustrating her own children's books. In 1999, she published a picture book aimed at toddlers called Hiccup the Viking Who Was Seasick. And in 2003, she would use Hiccup as the protagonist in How to Train Your Dragon, a chapter book about a fantasy Viking kingdom and their interactions with dragons. It was a hit, and she would go on to write 12 dragon books total, selling more than 15 million copies. Dreamworks Animation first became interested in Cowell's books in the mid-2000s. Producer Bonnie Arnold had just had success with Over the Hedge, and so Dreamworks leaders asked her what she wanted to do next, and she said, How to Train Your Dragon. Arnold and Dreamworks first hired Peter Hastings to direct the movie. His vision followed the novel pretty closely, but Dreamworks was worried it would only appeal to younger viewers, so they took him off the project. The studio then hired Chris Sanders, and he brought on Dean DuBois as co-director. The two of them had made Lilo and Stitch together at Disney. Sanders and DuBois made some changes to age up the story. For example, Hiccup doesn't have a love interest in the book, so they invented the character of Astrid for the movie. In the novel, Toothless is pretty small and is believed to be a common or garden dragon. In the film, they made him a Night Fury, one of the rarest and most powerful dragons known to man. Toothless's design was meant to be at once ferocious yet approachable and emotive. His sleek black body was inspired by Black Panthers, but he was given large ears and eyes to fully display his emotions. Likewise, the design team tried to craft dragon creatures that were comical, but still innovative and unique from other dragon stories. Along those same lines, thorough research was done to depict dynamic flight scenes that would stand apart from live action and look amazing in 3D, as well as the fire that would come from the dragons. They didn't want it to look like the propane flames we typically see in live action films. The directors also wanted to give the film a mature live action feel, so they hired legendary cinematographer Roger Deakins to serve as a visual consultant. When it came time to cast the film, improv skills were a must. So Sanders and DuBois hired actors with comedy backgrounds, including Jay Baruchel, Christopher Mintz-Plasse, Jonah Hill, Kristen Wiig, and TJ Miller. These actors were often brought in to record together so they could bounce off each other's energies, which is not very common in animation voice recording. They also hired a number of Scottish actors, throwing back to the story's roots and giving it some authenticity, including Gerard Butler, Craig Ferguson, David Tennant, Kieran Elliott, and Ashley Jensen. David Tennant voices Spite Lout, but he actually wasn't credited in the movie. He's since gone on to become very involved in the Dragon universe. He's recorded audiobooks for the series and did narration for the film's website. A happy accident happened in the famous touch scene. Toothless was not supposed to be as hesitant as he is. That was actually an animation error, but the directors liked it, so they kept it in. When creating the sounds of the terrible terrors, one of the sound designers came across a YouTube dog named Paco. They liked Paco's barks so much that they hired him to make sounds for the movie and paid him $100. Gloria the hippo from Madagascar makes a brief cameo in the film. Steven Spielberg, one of the founders of Dreamworks, gave an integral note on the movie. He felt that the bond between Hiccup and Toothless was lacking towards the end of the movie, so they added Toothless into a scene late in the picture where Hiccup is dealing with the loss of his leg. For the film's music, Dreamworks brought back John Powell, marking his 6th collaboration with the studio. Powell inflected his bombastic score with Scottish and Irish influences and used instruments like the penny whistle and bagpipes, while Icelandic singer Jónsi wrote and performed Sticks and Stones for the movie. By the end of production, Dreamworks spent $165 million making the film. How to Train Your Dragon was originally supposed to be released in November 2009, but then it was delayed to avoid competition with other family-friendly films. This was the peak of the 3D movie craze. Every studio wanted the extra revenue that came with 3D releases, but that led to a lot of extra competition and limited screen availability in theaters. Many multiplexes at the time only had one screen that could play 3D movies. So Dreamworks had carved out a March release for How to Train Your Dragon, making 3D a big part of its rollout. But in February, a month before release, Warner Brothers announced that it would be upgrading Clash of the Titans from 2D to 3D, and they planned to release it 1 week after How to Train Your Dragon. And so Dreamworks CEO Jeffrey Katzenberg was pissed that his 3D screens would be cut down in the second week. This caused a lot of tension in Hollywood, and movie theater executives said later that Paramount who was distributing How to Train Your Dragon, used high-pressure tactics to coerce theaters into screening the movie, rather than Clash of the Titans and Disney's live-action Alice in Wonderland, which had been in theaters for a few weeks at that point. How to Train Your Dragon ended up opening on 4,055 screens on March 26, 2010. It grossed $43.7 million opening weekend, beating out Hot Tub Time Machine. She's Out of My League was also still in theaters at that time, so you could have made it a Jay Baruchel double feature if you were so inclined. And then How to Train Your Dragon ended up grossing $495 million total worldwide. Critics loved it. Today, 99% of the 210 reviews assessed by Rotten Tomatoes are positive, and it remains DreamWorks Animation's best movie on the tomato meter. Audiences loved it too, giving it an A CinemaScore. It was nominated for 2 Oscars, Best Animated Feature and Best Score, losing the former to Toy Story 3 and the latter to The Social Network. But it soared at the Annie Awards, winning 10 of its 14 nominations, including Best Animated Feature. The movie did well on DVD and Blu-ray. By 2012, it had sold 9.7 million copies. How to Train Your Dragon spawned a massive franchise, with dozens of video games for nearly every platform since 2010. There's comic books, graphic novels, there's a touring arena show, and an ice show on a cruise ship. Haida Park and Motion Gate Dubai both feature How to Train Your Dragon theme park lands, while Universal's Epic Universe, which is opening in Orlando this year, will have an entire section dedicated to How to Train Your Dragon. There have been half a dozen short films and 3 animated TV series that in total have 22 seasons and 223 episodes. Plus, there were 2 animated sequel movies, How to Train Your Dragon 2 in 2014, which made $621 million off a $145 million budget, and How to Train Your Dragon The Hidden World in 2019, which made $540 million off a $129 million budget. The sequel films are significant because they feature substantial time jumps that allowed the characters to actually age and grow, which isn't typical of animated sequels. In total, the movies have grossed more than $1.6 billion worldwide. And in 2025, DreamWorks has a live-action remake of How to Train Your Dragon, written and directed by original filmmaker Dean DuBois, with a release date of June 13th. And it's all because a girl on a tiny island dreamed of dragons.